Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do another recommendation video. This time I'm talking about post-apocalyptic fiction, primarily horror, although some of these books lean a little bit more towards the science fiction side of the genre. And this is not probably my favorite subgenre, so I'll admit that there are some really beloved classics that are going to be missing from my list. But as always is the case, there are exceptions to the rules, so I compiled a list of some of my favorite books that fall within the post-apocalyptic realm, and hopefully you'll find some recommendations here, whether you're a big fan yourself or looking for something different. All that being said, let's get started. First, I want to talk about Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay. This is a book set in a near future where there is a viral outbreak, and we follow a woman who is living in a remote place with her husband. They are expecting their first child. She's pregnant, and right at the beginning of the story, they are attacked by people that are infected with the disease, which causes them to go into rage, and so they get attacked and the husband is killed. And so the story starts off with her having to go on the run in order to protect her unborn child. She ends up meeting up with her friend who is a doctor, and they go off to seek help. And the story is one that I really like to recommend for people that like post-apocalyptic fiction, but specifically like a really intimate take on it. So my complaint with the genre in general is that it is very vast when it comes to the storytelling element, which some people love. So often it's told over multiple years, you follow a huge cast of characters. But what I like with Paul Tremblay is that he takes that post-apocalyptic setting and then he makes it a very intimate tale, basically following these two women and their friendship as they're trying to find help. As with most post-apocalyptic fiction, this book does involve a lot of traveling, which again is not my favorite trope of the genre, but Paul Tremblay has such an amazing ability to write stories that are compelling. I think his writing itself is very well done, a little bit literary, and just no matter what he does, I enjoy it. So if you're looking to get into post-apocalyptic fiction and specifically looking for something that is much more character focused, a little bit smaller in scale, this one is definitely one to check out. It came out right in the midst of 2020 and it was crazy topical at the time. I understand that it was actually written prior to everything that happened, but it really was a fantastic look at what happens to the world in a situation of an outbreak. And so you're dealing with quarantine and isolation, and it definitely rang true at the time I read it. So definitely, again, recommend that one to anyone interested in post-apocalyptic fiction. Next up, I want to recommend The Girl in Red by Christina Henry, and this is a post-apocalyptic story following a young woman who at the beginning of the story is off by herself. She is trying to survive. You find out that similar to the last one, there is some sort of viral outbreak, and she has to survive in a world that has really broken down. The story is told over two perspectives, one being the present day when she is alone, and you also get flashbacks to when her and her family are leaving, going off to go to their grandmother's place, which they believe to be safe. And so you get to find out what happens to the rest of her family. Now, if you can't tell from the title, this is technically a fairy tale retelling, which is not normally my favorite. So I held off reading this book for a long time, but I'm so glad that I finally gave it a try because it reads like post-apocalyptic fiction, not a fairy tale. This is not fantasy, and it just simply takes the idea of the girl in the red shirt going off to her grandmother's house and fighting against the big bad wolves, which really are just the evil men in this post-apocalyptic fiction future. And I like the fact that she really is a strong female character. Often you get these kind of pseudo strong characters, but they actually are just very weak and emotional, but she actually is very smart and spry, and there's a reason that she survived so long. And I like this one quite a bit. For the most part, it just kind of reads more like, again, post-apocalyptic fiction, but towards the end there are some good horror elements, and I just really enjoyed this one. I think Christina Henry is an excellent storyteller, and if you like this subgenre, this is an excellent place to start with her work. Next up, we have The Night Parade by Ronald Malfi. This follows a father and daughter who go on the run after there is a breakout of some kind of pandemic flu, which appears to be caused by the birds, and they go on the run. You find out that the daughter possibly has something special about her. She seems to react to the illness differently and is just a little bit special. And so a lot of the story is about her father protecting her. And again, like a lot of books I'm going to talk about in this genre, a lot of this time is spent on the road, meeting up with other people. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and trying to protect their family. And I'll also mention that this book reminded me a lot of the Last of Us video game, and so if you like that one, you'll probably like this one too. It's very similar in terms of theme and plot, but again, I enjoy that narrative, so I did really appreciate it. And I really like the father-daughter dynamics. It's something I really get emotional about in books. And I've said before, just like Christina Henry, Ronald Malfi is another one that I consider to be a really good storyteller. So even if you're not necessarily really interested in the plot, because I'll be honest, I've read so much post-apocalyptic fiction and they all kind of follow the same narrative for the most part. There's a few exceptions on this list, but despite kind of knowing where the story was going to go and it following a lot of the same tropes and beats of the genre, it was still really enjoyable to read. So again, obviously it's on this list, so I do recommend it. Now switching to something a little bit different, I also want to talk about Moon of the Crusted Snow by Robashik Rice, and this is a story that is set in northern Canada, specifically on an Ontario native reserve, and we follow the community members here at the beginning of some kind of apocalyptic event. The story is primarily just told from these people's perspective, so we as a reader really don't get to know what is going on, and that is something I love about this book, but might drive other people crazy. So if you're a reader who needs to know what the event is, how it affects everything, the global implications of the apocalypse, this book might not be for you. But if you love a character story, if you love getting to see how a community comes together and at the same time falls apart in these stressful situations, this is one you might enjoy. At the beginning of the story, we follow the characters, and at first it just seems a little bit strange. Their cell phones lose service, their electricity goes off, but because they live in northern Canada, which does tend to have really unreliable utilities, at first this is normal, but eventually it takes too long for things to get back online, and they realize that something is wrong. Eventually people from outside the community come in and start to give them little hints about what's happening. And so the story is really about the community again coming together. You get to see the struggles, the wonderful moments of sharing and love, and this one is just beautiful. It's quite short, it's very atmospheric, it's set in the winter, which I love, so you get kind of that cold feeling to it. And again, for me, I liked it because it's post-apocalyptic fiction, but it's very, very quiet and very, very intimate, which are things that I don't see enough in the genre. So this, again, takes the ideas of it, but goes in a different direction. Again, you're not going to find a lot of answers in this book, so you need to be okay with that. But if you can get past that, I highly, highly recommend this one of my personal favorites. After that, I want to talk about The Wolves of Winter by Tyrell Johnson, and this follows a young woman who goes to the Yukon region with her family in order to escape a series of apocalyptic events that are happening around the world. The story is told from her perspective, and you find out that there is not just one thing happening in the world, but there is a virus that has broken out, there have been bombs that have been exploded, and the world is just going to nowhere good. So her family goes off to protect themselves, and they find out that the virus is less powerful in the northern region where it is cold, and so they try to go to the safest place they can. This involves them surviving out in the wilderness, so they have to hunt and trap food and all of that. And so we follow the girl who has these skills and is very spry and a bit of a survivor herself. This story, I'll admit, is probably my least favorite of everything I'm going to recommend here, and it's a book I liked but definitely did not love, and that comes from the fact that while this is classified as adult fiction, it read like young adult, and no slight to anyone who prefers that age category, but this book just read young to me, and it followed a lot of the tropes. There's some love interest, and again, the girl, she's supposed to be this really strong character, and she just is a little bit emotional, a little bit probably realistic, but not my favorite. And so the reason I want to put this book on the list is that if you are watching this video and hoping to get a younger reader into post-apocalyptic fiction, and they're maybe turned off by some of the epics out there like The Stand, this might be a good entry point because it follows the tropes of the genre. You have a survival element, a virus that is broken out, and you get to see the terrible things that people do to each other at the end of the world. This one is a good one to try. And so hopefully that will be a good pick for, again, someone who either reads some YA or is trying to get someone into the genre, maybe someone who is trying to get into adult fiction in general. So that one you might want to consider as well. And finally, I could not get through this recommendation video without talking about one of my favorite classics, and that is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This follows a man who believes he is the last person alive at the end of the world. There is a virus that has broken out that has pretty much turned everyone into zombie-like vampires, and these creatures are clawing at his door. He alone is trying to survive in his cabin, get food, and just outlast everything that's happening, but there really isn't a future to be waiting for. There is no one making a virus cure. There are no scientists out there to the best of his knowledge, and so he is alone. I picked up this book when I was researching books for the Books and Freezer podcast. We were doing an episode on post-apocalyptic fiction, and I'll be honest, I was struggling at the time because I think one of the things that I struggle with this subgenre is that it can be really, really depressing, and you have to be in the right mood for the end of the world. And I'm not always in the mood for that. But despite that, this book worked really well for me, and it is depressing. It is dark. Like I said, there is very little hope in this book, but despite all that, I found myself completely pulled into the story. I was immersed. I love the main character. He is so skeptical of everything that is happening and these potential vampires. And again, it's just a survival story, and it's quiet and so well written. So I definitely recommend it. This is nothing like the movie with Will Smith and is definitely worth checking out. It's very accessible to read if you, like me, don't always get along with classic literature. This one totally holds up today. And again, I feel like it's a little bit different because it isn't a book with a big travel montage where the characters go across America. Instead, this is this man hauled up in his home trying to survive, and it just, it felt different than everything else I was reading at the time. And so definitely one that is worth checking out if you have somehow not gotten to read this book at this point. So that's it for this video. I would love to hear what you think of my book recommendations and which ones you are planning on picking up and reading. I'd also love your own recommendations for more books that I should try out, especially more underhyped post-apocalyptic fiction, because I am very aware of the big classic iconic books out there. I did want to mention, if you're wondering, I purposely excluded zombie fiction from this list only because I've done multiple videos on that topic, and while yes, zombies is certainly a post-apocalyptic event, for the most part it kind of is its own thing, so I wanted to exclude those ones here just so I wasn't being repetitive with books I've talked about before. So if I remember, I'll put some links to those videos if you want even more terrible futures to read about. But hopefully you enjoyed this. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, science fiction, and fantasy, and you can help me out by sharing this video around online with anyone else that enjoys post-apocalyptic fiction, giving me a thumbs up, and if you hit that notification bell, you'll never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.